This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are talking politics and religion without killing each other. I am your host, Corey Nathan. It is an honor to be a part of the Democracy Group, a network of podcasts that examines what's broken in our democracy and how we can work together to fix it. Speaking of which, we got two dads talking democracy today. So I'm gonna skip most of the rest of my usual intro. I'm gonna introduce these fellas. William Joseph Walsh. By the way, does anybody ever call you William Joseph?
Oh God, Corey, I haven't heard that in 60 years. No.
Okay, all right. When you're getting scolded by your mom, I'm sure. So Joe Walsh.
Over dinner the other night, we did have a conversation over calling him Joey.
Joey.
Yes.
That just
my
feels
mom
like home to
called me Joey till her dying day.
Oh man. So Joe Walsh served in the U.S. Congress in Illinois' 8th, coming in with the Tea Party wave. Then he had a nationally syndicated, very highly popular radio show. He was even a presidential candidate as a challenger to then President Trump in the 2020 Republican presidential primary. So again, it's always worth noting, this is a man who had great prominence in the Republican Party and the conservative media, but he sacrificed it all because of his principles. And unlike so many in today's Republican Party, he couldn't look at what happened in Charlottesville, for example, with the Unite the Right rally and nod along as Trump talked about very fine people on both sides, or watch I think we talked about last time, we talked about Trump's epic ass kissing of Putin in Helsinki and keep on towing the company line. So today, Joe hosts one of my favorite podcasts, White Flag with Joe Walsh. Now one of my daily staples. I love those 7-minute daily ones that you're doing along with the interviews. But for the purposes of today's conversation, Joe is still very much a conservative in a lot of ways, specifically when it comes to the Second Amendment. He's a self-described, and correct me if I got this wrong, rabid gun rights advocate. We are.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Okay, good. We are also. There's no cursing on this show, you fucking guy. Anyway, we're also joined by Fred Guttenberg. Fred began his public life after the murder of his 14-year-old daughter, Jaime, in the Parkland school shooting on February 14th, 2018. Many might remember Fred's powerful words at the public vigil in Parkland after this atrocity. But what some folks might not also know about Fred is that 4 months prior to the murder of his daughter, Fred's brother Michael passed away in October 2017 from cancer related to his service in 9/11. Fred's brother was one of the original first responders at the World Trade Center with a team of doctors who got trapped there as it collapsed. So following Fred's involvement in these two very different American tragedies, Fred's traveled the country talking about both events, but also talking about perspective, perseverance, and resilience. He and his wife, Jennifer, started a 501c3 organization dedicated to Jaime's life called Orange Ribbons for Jaime. And Fred created a 501c4 called Orange Ribbons for Gun Safety, whose mission is to reduce gun violence by advocating for policies and candidates who believe in common sense gun safety. And I just learned today that these two guys on very different sides of a very heated issue are traveling the country with two dads talking democracy, and they are in the process already of saving democracy. Fred, Joe, thank you so much for joining me today. How's everybody holding up?
Hey, Corey.
Hey, Corey.
Yeah.
Can I add one thing to Fred's bio?
Yeah.
He's also one of my heroes.
I
love this
that.
man.
Yeah.
And listen, it is the craziest thing because I don't know, just about 3 years ago, I would have told you he's a lunatic. He's one of the guys that I was actively trying to demonize. Joe thought I wanted to come and remove all of his weapons personally from his home. I mean, we misunderstood each other completely because we had never spoken to each other.
Yeah.
I'm honored to call him one of my close friends now.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, Fred, Joe and I already know each other a little bit, as I told you, and I love him. I hate him all at the same time. I think you can't think, if you're friends with Joe, you can't think of him any other way. But Fred, you and I have some serious issues, man. And that is my New York Rangers are going to kick the Florida Panthers' ass.
Stop. Stop. Just stop.
You're from New York. How are you a Florida Panthers fan now? That's what I got to know.
So I'll tell you how. So, yes, I left New York when I was 23, and I would probably call myself more of an Islanders guy. I grew up on Long Island, but I wasn't a huge hockey guy until I moved to Florida. And when the Panthers came, I was literally living right across the street where they built the building in Sunrise, Florida. And I just became a huge Panthers fan. And then I had this thing happen. I got married and I had a son, and who's now 23. But when he was 3, he put on skates for the very first time.
Oh, man.
And he's been playing hockey since. And so the Panthers have been a huge part of our life. My son trained and played in their training facility, and he now works for the team. So,
oh, wow.
So going back to your statement before, the Panthers are going to the Stanley Cup again this year, and the outcome will be different.
I want to circle back with you. I want to see if we could have like some sort of a bet. I'm not a gambling man. That's not a bet that I would take, but there could be something fun that we might be able to do here.
All right.
But okay, so I'm curious. My son, my middle kid, the older of my 2 boys, was born on July 14th, 2003, which is a day after Jaime was born.
I was just going to say that. Wow.
Yeah.
Jaime's birthday, July 13th. Yeah.
My oldest kid is 23 now. And when was Jesse born?
November 11th, 2000.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So he's a little older than Savannah. But also one other point of connection. This is why I'm getting chills just thinking about it. So my youngest kid, Emerson, just graduated from Saugus High School. My 2 nieces went to.
You're kidding me. In California, Saugus High School, where the shooting was a few years ago.
That's right. In fact, I think it wasn't it on November 11th? I might be wrong about that. It's right around that time. It was
close to that. I don't remember the exact date, but I will tell you, the Tretta family from Saugus High School have become dear friends of mine. I've gotten to know Macy's parents, who was killed that day.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's a lot of connections. It really resonates. I was just having a talk with 2 of my really, really close friends. In fact, we're starting a local business here together. I'm more aligned with you, Fred, just to be totally candid. But my 2 friends, very dear friends, they grew up with guns. Some of their most cherished memories was, each of them when their dads took them out for the first time to go hunting. So it's something in the family. But I wanted to ask you something to start out. You're obviously now a very prominent figure advocating for common sense gun policies all over the country. Prior to the tragedy, prior to when Jaime was murdered, had you already developed a strong position or set of opinions with regard to gun legislation?
No, I hadn't. And I'll say this. I wasn't an anti-gun guy then. I am not now. My father-in-law is a gun owner. Many of my friends are. Some of my closest friends in life are police officers. I was never anti-gun. That hasn't changed. Listen, before Jaime was killed, unfortunately, I was silent on gun violence. And there's a difference between being anti-gun and anti-gun violence. I'm anti-gun violence. Okay. I don't want to infringe on a guy like Joe's rights. But I do want to do everything I can to ensure we're taking all the necessary steps to stop the next shooting. And, I think the whole premise of your question really gets to what I try to do, which is to make it clear. We can support gun owners. We can support the Second Amendment while working hard to do common sense things to reduce the reality of gun violence in an America that now includes over 400 million weapons. You mentioned your son, 20 years old now. I know that because he's a day younger than my daughter, who should be 20 years old now. 20 years ago, we had only 200 million weapons in America. Now we're over 400 million. 20 years ago, since you mentioned Saugus High School, which included a ghost gun, there was no such thing. There are now. 20 years ago, AR-15 sales were less than 2% of all guns sold. They're over 25% now. We've changed in the past 20 years. So, not anti-gun. I'm not looking to harm anybody's rights. But in an America with those kinds of numbers in our communities, we need to do everything we can to stop gun violence.
So it's interesting how you put that, because I've heard you over the last couple of years in interviews, and I've read a lot of your work. Before your relationship with Joe, when you first started speaking out on a national platform, would you have been careful to specify that you're not anti-gun the way you talk about it now? Or has your relationship with Joe and other folks like that enhanced, given you more nuance in how you approach your advocacy?
You know, what gave me the nuance was understanding really quickly that a guy like me, who always considered himself to not be anti-gun, was perceived that way because I wanted to do something about gun violence. And it quickly became clear to me that anything I wanted to say or do was rejected out of hand by guys like Joe.
Yeah.
They immediately demonized me, and candidly, I wanted to demonize them as well. I saw them as the problem, because rather than focusing on the fact that, no, the truth of what I was trying to do, okay, misinformation always got in the way. It's part of why I wrote the book American Carnage. And so the way I talk about it now, and really wanting it to be clear that what I hate is gun violence, has evolved over time, because I never did in the first couple of years make that distinction. I was focused on fighting for policy, fighting for legislation, fighting for candidates, but not necessarily taking the time to learn how to engage the majority of Americans, that includes gun owners and non-gun owners, and to speak to all of them.
Right, right. So, Joe, I also wanted to ask you something similar. As I mentioned, a number of guys I know feel really strongly about the Second Amendment and gun rights, and it comes from early on in life. It's tied to family. It's tied to tradition. So there's a story there. So I was wondering, for you, at what point in your life did you begin to form your views on gun rights?
Early, really early, because of my use of firearms. And I'm a student of, and I've taught American history and American government. If the three of us could ever go back in time, if we could ever be, I believe, kind of in reincarnation. There's a part of me that believes I lived during the American Revolution. So I love the notion of our rights, our First and Second and Third and Fourth Amendment rights. So politically, because I so love our founding, it's just always been ingrained in me. Okay. The Second Amendment has.
Well, and I think the key thing is, I don't think either one of us disagrees on the Second Amendment. I think where you have breakdowns across the country is on trying to actually agree on what it actually says.
So that's an interesting point. This is the way I thought of it. Before we move on, I wanted to tell you about something else that's important. Money. Specifically your money. In all seriousness, I wanted to tell you about my advisor and my friend, George Meza. George runs Meza Wealth Management. And with George, it's not just about money. It's about helping us manage our present and plan for our future. And unlike a lot of other firms out there, George and I actually have a relationship. He knows me, he knows my family, and I know his wonderful family. I also know his firm and the incredible team he's put together, from his chief investment officer to some of the other great people in his office, like Jessica, their head of operations, that are always there to help me and with all aspects of our portfolio. You see, the thing is, I got a lot going on. I guess we all got a lot going on, and I don't have the time to watch our investments all day, every day. And even if I did, I don't have the experience and expertise that George's team collectively has. So we get the entire Meza Wealth Management team, all their expertise and all their integrity. And again, it's based on George knowing me personally, knowing my goals, and even the kind of risk that's appropriate for me to take, which, by the way, could change from one season to the next. And they're on top of all of that. So if you want George Meza and Meza Wealth Management to be on your team, just visit their website, mezawealth.com. That's MEZA wealth.com, www.mezawealth.com. And that will also be in our show notes, so you can check that. And now, back to our show. Yeah, this is the way I thought of it. I wanted to read a couple different passages, a couple different things. The first you'll both recognize. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the free people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, I want to read something else. Having read that, that's the Second Amendment, obviously. We have the Second Amendment, but we also have this. Independent, fearless, bright, a graceful dancer. Through dance, she was the star. In her family, she was the spirit. With her friends, she was the joy. Dance was the largest part of her life, and she practiced 13 hours a week. She once wrote, "I dance because it makes me feel possibilities are endless and limits don't exist. Every time I leap, I feel as though I've touched the stars." She was a straight-A student with dreams of becoming a pediatric physical therapist. Sorry. So I read these two together because the question, the challenge is, how can we hold space for both? Yeah, we have a sense of loyalty to this country. John Adams put it, a government of laws and not a government of men, but also honoring our unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Life, how do we as a nation do both? Honor the founding principles while valuing life itself.
Yeah, Corey, let me jump in just to give Fred a moment. And I have not said this enough around Fred. It is an utter tragedy. It is horrible that Jaime was murdered. I will never and can never imagine what my dear friend Fred goes through every day. She wasn't just a kid. She was beautiful.
Yeah.
She was accomplished. She was smart. Fred, I think you said she would have been 20 this year. That young lady had a unbelievably promising life ahead of her.
Yes,
she was not everything again, Fred's daughter, but everything I've read and heard about her, this was a young woman who was going to make a profound difference in life. That needs to always be remembered. Look, to segue from that to this. We are born with rights that protect us. These rights don't come from government. They come to us because we were born. We formed a government to make sure our rights are protected. None of those unalienable rights are unlimited. My Second Amendment rights are not unlimited. My First Amendment rights are not unlimited. I can go on down the line.
And yet a lot of people, Joe, as you know, will say their Second Amendment right is unlimited.
Completely. Yeah. Our country's history has been a history legally and statutorily trying to find that balance. Sometimes we do better and sometimes we don't do very well.
So what do you say?
Hey, Corey, can I just say something? Because you asked the question, like, how do we bridge that?
Right.
And part of how is conversations like this, where Joe and I genuinely both want to support his Second Amendment rights, and we also both want to do everything we can to reduce gun violence, and showing it's okay to talk about it, and to vet it out. Listen, in Florida, because we did exactly what people thought could never happen. In Florida, 3 weeks after Parkland, we passed true, meaningful gun safety legislation, red flag laws. We raised the age to 21. Background, a waiting period. We did all sorts of great stuff, and it was bipartisan. In fact, it was passed by a Republican-dominated House, a Republican-dominated Senate, and signed by, at the time, a Republican governor, Rick Scott. Okay. And not a single Republican in Florida paid a political price for it. Every one of them is either still in office or has been elevated to higher office. And so I would just say the way we do this is through conversations like this, where we are able to let people hear in calm ways the truth.
Right.
Well, and Corey, the other thing is, every American, I'm exaggerating, wants to minimize gun violence. There are some extreme voices on the left that would get rid of the Second Amendment and would want to get rid of guns. And there are some extreme voices on the right that will not entertain any limits on the Second Amendment.
And who also use the Second Amendment now to discuss things like, if they don't agree with the outcome of the next election, Second Amendment solutions. Okay, so each side has the extremes. We're trying to find the majority of Americans that actually want to live in a safe democracy.
Yeah. So what is a good way to start those conversations? I mean, you know how these things go. As soon as you sit down and somebody says one thing that triggers another guy to make all kinds of assumptions that you want to come to my house and take all my guns, or you want to shoot up my dog and my kids and my everything. That's how these typically start. They don't go anywhere good or healthy or productive. What's a better way to start these conversations?
Corey, I'll start and Fred can jump in. The American people need to do what Fred and I did. 5 years ago, Fred and I would light into each other on social media. We would go after each other on TV. It would get ugly and personal, right? We did what damn near everybody on Twitter does now. What changed that? Fred and I took it offline. Fred and I began to speak privately. And over the course of that, we became friends and we got to a point where we could talk about this issue without wanting to kill each other. We went private.
But, it also requires, it didn't start exactly that way.
No.
Joe actually publicly started it, reaching out.
Oh.
So what happened was this Father's Day will be 3 years since I started this initiative that I was trying to push called Dads for Gun Safety. And the reason for it was, moms that were truly engaged, right?
Yeah.
Kids are engaged, but dads weren't so much. And I wanted to engage dads and get them more involved in the idea that, yeah, you can be a gun owner and for gun safety. And Joe and I at first were going back and forth on this because he thought he disagreed with everything that I wanted to do.
Corey, Fred wanted me to sign this petition, Dads for Gun Safety, and I disagreed with almost all the reforms on it. But then we went on Morning Joe.
And we're not there yet. Because before we get there, the way we ended up on Morning Joe is when I announced I wanted to do this, at first he and I went back and forth. And then all of a sudden he tweeted out, I think I disagree with everything you want to do, but I respect the hell out of what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
And that was the crack in the ice. And then we started to have some nice public dialogue. And then we spoke on the phone. And then on a trip to DC, I met with him and his lovely wife, Helene, for dinner. And our story, we posted pictures of us at dinner having a great time and having drinks. And all of a sudden, Morning Joe paid attention to the fact that like these two guys who shouldn't be having this good time are connecting. And we're just curious as to what happened here.
Yeah.
And so we spoke to them and they hosted us on the show the Friday before that Father's Day weekend. And on that show, which was supposed to be like a 7-minute interview, I think it went for almost 20. They were engaging us, and out of nowhere, Joe said, I know I told you I would never sign that letter, but I want to just say for everyone listening, I'm going to sign it. And the fucker almost made me cry on Morning Joe.
Corey, bullshit. He started to tear up on national TV. Yes, he did.
I was going to ask you about that, Joe. One of the first things I see when I crack open the second book is Joe's ringing endorsement. But it starts because he's still got to be Joe. He says, "Let me say at the outset that Fred Guttenberg and I disagree on very little when it comes to gun policy." But so tell me why you did end up endorsing the book and
well, it wasn't a book. It was a letter, basically of a theme of things I wanted to do. Yeah. And it was called, the letter was dads. It was a Dads for Gun Safety, and I was asking dads across the country to sign it.
Okay. But then is that what you printed in American Carnage?
No, this was before American
Carnage.
Carnage.
It was well before American Carnage. American Carnage came out last year.
Okay.
So Fred's pushing this letter that he wants dads to sign with a bunch of specific reforms. I oppose damn near all the reforms. We go on Morning Joe and we're talking about it. We're talking about our relationship. Fred and I are at least kind of friendly and respectful now. And then Fred brings up the damn petition, the letter, and it just hit me in the middle of the segment that I wanted to send a signal that even though I disagreed with what's in that letter, I agree with Fred's overarching goal here to get dads involved to help limit gun violence. So I got caught up in the overall goal. So I made the gesture. I'll sign the letter, even if I disagree with most of it, because you're doing a damn good thing.
And something else happened on the show. After that, I almost checked out of the rest of the interview, and he and Joe Scarborough, another gun guy, basically spent the next 10 minutes going back and forth on all the different things they agree on that
that kind of fucking that part of it pissed me off. That part of it pissed me off.
Why, Joe?
It's all good. You're always pissed off.
Fred was just sitting there laughing. Me and Joe.
I was just thinking, this is beautiful. I love this. These guys, we're all on the same page.
Yeah.
Corey,
Joe sounded like a gun grabber.
I should make this point, Corey. This is an important point. I was a very high-profile gun guy then. Yeah. I still am. And I made up my mind that because I was a very divisive political guy, I wanted to reach out to people who disagreed with me. I reached out to 5 or 6 or 7 very high-profile gun control, gun safety advocates. And I'm telling you, Corey, 5 or 6 of them said, "Fuck you, Joe Walsh," to me privately. "I have no interest in sitting down with you. You're a gun nut." Fred's the only one of those high-profile gun safety people who said, "All right, Walsh, I'll at least listen to you." He was the only one.
That's a sign of hope, I would think. So you started with what you agreed upon, at least in terms of the shared goals. Did you discover not just shared values, but it sounds like even in terms of it seems like there might be a lot of differences in terms of legislation, but now it sounds like there's overlap in terms of actual legislation that you can both advocate for. So
there are things we both agree on.
Yeah.
So that would reduce gun violence and save lives. Yes.
So what would be some of those, some examples? You mentioned red flag laws in Florida. Is that one area?
Corey, the area where my engagement with Fred and other gun safety folks, but principally Fred, over the last few years, has helped open my eyes to the fact that we need to do a hell of a lot more before a gun is bought to make sure that somebody who shouldn't have a gun doesn't get a gun. So whereas 5 years ago, before my engagement with Fred, you say universal background checks, I say, fuck you, you're coming for my guns. You say red flag laws, I say, fuck you, you're taking away my guns. I now, again, am very open to expanding and toughening up background checks and red flag laws with, a lot of, markers and requirements, but I'm much more open to reforms in that realm.
So what's the argument as a gun rights advocate for red flag laws and universal background checks?
Well, the gun rights argument is I'm a legal law-abiding gun owner. Right. 99% of gun owners in this country are law-abiding gun owners. All of this gun violence that's going on is giving us a fucking bad name, and I'm sick of it. Yeah. Right. So, damn it, let's do something to make sure bad guys, thugs, stick people can't get a hold of guns. Most gun owners are open to doing more before a gun is bought. Because
can I back that up with some data?
Yeah. Go ahead, Fred.
In Florida, because we did pass red flag laws in 2018, they've now been used over 12,000 times. And to Joe's point about gun violence not being good for gun owners in terms of giving them a bad reputation, the number one users of the red flag law in Florida, it's the red county sheriffs.
Oh, that's interesting. I thought you were going to say domestic. It's domestic.
It's the red county sheriffs that are using it far more. That's
interesting. So,
well, and Corey, Fred knows this, and I think Fred generally agrees with me. In concept, and in practice, a red flag law can be really effective. But again, Mr. Constitution, Mr. Bill of Rights, we got to be very careful because there's due process stuff here, right? We got to be careful about a local sheriff or a family member demanding we take that gun away from that person. That person who owns that gun has due process rights. So again, you can craft these, but we always got to be cognizant of that.
That's a good question. So I've been listening to David French, who's a brilliant legal mind, and he talks about it's not just about red flag laws; it's about well-written red flag laws and well executed, well enforced, properly enforced red flag laws.
And with appropriate training to everyone who may be tasked with carrying them out.
So just for a devil's advocate, what would be an example of a poorly written red flag law?
Well, too liberally written and then poorly executed and abused. Okay. There's a red flag law in my state. My boyfriend just broke up with me. I know he owns guns. I'm going to want to mess him up. I call local law enforcement. My boyfriend's been threatening me and threatened to beat me up. Come get his guns. There are avenues where these things can be abused. And that person, again, we got to be very careful that that person's constitutional due process is taken care of.
Which is why the due process component that's built into the Florida law matters. Yeah. And it's how we got the bipartisan support. But listen, they can be really poorly written in the other direction as well. Look at Maine, which didn't write a red flag law. They wrote a yellow flag law because they didn't want to engage in a red flag law I'm guessing the reasons Joe is pointing out that people might be concerned. But the yellow flag law was written to say, hey, we have a flag law, but it was made impossible to use. Impossible. So the guy who had the mass shooting there just a few months ago, that person was a known threat. But the yellow flag law was so impossible that law enforcement and others who should have been able to do something couldn't.
Yeah.
So there is a way to do this that it satisfies the needs of public safety and the needs of the Second Amendment. But we have to find that balance. And listen, again, I'll go back to Florida. In Florida, you will not see or hear a single legal lawful gun owner ever say a complaint about red flag laws because it's not impacting them.
And adjudicated, Corey, promptly. Right. If you're going to come take my guns away, there needs to be a hearing immediately, and I need to have every ability to make my case.
Yeah. Yeah. Fred, I was curious about the book. You tackle every myth there is. Good guy with a gun, bad guy with a gun. All these things. Every chapter is just packed with all these, these 3 or 4 word slogans that the NRA and other organizations put out there. Have you noticed do you know the degree to which the book has equipped other activists? Have you heard stories about, because I'm not interested in, now I have a comeback for this debate that I'm in and I can beat down the guy that disagrees with me at church or wherever. How has your book equipped other people to really engage in a more meaningful way?
Listen, it's a great question. It's the reason we wrote the book the way that we did, to highlight the lie or the myth, to present the facts and data, and then the end of each chapter, it's a bottom line where we tell exactly what we covered and how to talk about it.
Yeah.
And so activists across the country are using it. It's being used in some public policy courses in universities. I've given a copy of the book. I walk every hallway in Congress when the book came out. I gave every member of Congress in the House and the Senate a copy of the book. I also had a chance to go visit the White House and make sure they're all equipped with the book and the information. Listen, one of the reasons why I wrote the book is because this is not who America always was. America has always been a country with gun owners that believed in gun safety and responsible firearms ownership. That started to change for a variety of reasons in the late 70s when the NRA went through a massive change, and their efforts to influence policy and politics really went full on in the 80s. And in the 90s, you started to see the impact. But in the after 2000s, when we started to see a real change in laws that fueled gun sales, okay? And one of the myths that, again, inspired me to want to write this book was the notion, this sentence that we all know it. I'll start. You started saying it before. The only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun.
Yeah.
That sentence never existed before Sandy Hook. It was Wayne LaPierre's response to the Sandy Hook shooting. Rather than taking that as a moment to say, how do we together protect rights, but also make sure we're protecting our kids?
So, Joe, I heard you say in not so many words that the NRA ain't doing any favors to real gun rights advocates. What is your argument there? What is your thinking there?
So here's how much there's been a sea change. When I'm in Congress 10 years ago, look, there's a myth that the NRA and other lobbying groups can really influence members, maybe on the margin, but generally the NRA supported me because I went to Congress as a big gun guy. But even just 10 years ago, I cared about the rating the NRA would give me. Now, I used to be a member of the NRA, no longer. A lot of what Fred said, because the NRA has zero interest in entertaining any reform. Internally, it's become a very corrupt organization.
Right.
And it has been for a while. But for a while, it's led with kind of, let's make guns cool and boom, 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 instead of focusing on gun safety. Corey, I'm a bigger gun rights guy than some of these fucking lunatic Republicans in Congress now. I couldn't imagine, as a member of Congress, and I put out Christmas cards. Oh, yeah, the
Christmas cards, yeah.
Putting out a Christmas card with me and my family holding our favorite firearms.
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine that. But it shows how the mindset has changed in a bad way.
Yeah, it seems like it's more of a fetish than a tool to be used. And you cover that in the book too, Fred. I mean, the whole mindset. So
yeah,
I'm curious. In recent conversations that you've had, I love when you find things that you disagree about. There's clearly a lot that you disagree about. What are some of the top 2 or 3 things that you still you're very far apart on?
On guns or something else?
Anything. I mean, obviously you're wrong about the hockey, so we know that.
Corey, I was liking you, but it's becoming less.
I'll say this, Corey. I'm like off the charts pro-Israel, and I always have been. Fred is off the charts pro-Israel. He and I have real strong agreement there. We've come together because I'm clearly very much a never Trumper, and I'm putting my policy beliefs aside to help get Joe Biden reelected. Fred is a big Joe Biden supporter. Fred's a good, decent, moderate Democrat.
Yeah,
I'm still a libertarian Tea Party guy. So if he and I really got into a lot of policy issues, like on taxation and regulation, we'd probably disagree on most stuff. But right now, to me, it's all about saving democracy.
Yeah, and listen, I'll give you an example of something that Joe and I do disagree on. And we do have private conversation about it. And I hope that I can change his mindset on this.
No.
And I'm not going to stop trying. But it's on the idea of raising the age to 21. And without getting into the debate here, because that's a whole other conversation, we disagree on that.
Right.
But we continue talking about it. I know where he stands. I know why. He knows where I stand, and he knows why. But we disagree. But
Fred, go ahead. Keep going. Keep going.
But the key thing is, what we agree on is in a democracy, as long as you keep talking to one another,
right,
change is possible. And we love this democracy, and that trumps, I hate that word, that goes above all else in terms of the importance of what we do, because we do want democracy to survive past this election.
Okay.
And I think, Corey, one other, I'll just throw this in quickly. I'm pretty sure, Fred, you and I disagree on the other gun issue is I would allow armed adults in our schools, properly trained armed adults.
Completely disagree. We completely disagree.
Yeah. So there are a number of things.
We disagree so much that he and I have talked about for about a year now, actually having a public debate about it. We just haven't done it yet.
I think that'd be a lot of fun. Yeah.
Joe, I think I could convince you right now, or it might take you to meet my mother, Phyllis, to convince you that you're completely wrong. So both of my parents were lifelong educators in the New York City school system their entire careers. My brother was in the school system, his career. Now, I bring that up because if you ever met Phyllis, the last thing you would want is to have Phyllis with a gun in her hands at school. Like, I just can't see that happening.
Without even knowing Phyllis, I would probably agree. My whole point is, you can't force a teacher to be armed. I'm saying if teachers or administrators properly trained wanted to be armed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So you and I should have this debate another time because it's far more complicated, but you're wrong. Corey, next question.
Okay. So
no, but Corey, to Fred's broader point, and I don't know if this is where you were going.
Yeah.
We launched this Two Dads Defending Democracy.
That's kind of where I was going. I had an agenda. I had an agenda and bring you both on here. And I'm brilliant having come up with this really important agenda. Is I've heard you in interviews. But here's the thing. What I do is everybody who listens to the show know I read the books. I go back 10 years and listen to all the interviews. What I don't do is I don't go on Twitter and I don't check like the day's headlines.
So you had no idea what we were actually doing.
I had no freaking clue what you were up to. But I wanted to invite you on here and say, you guys got to do this thing. You got to tour the country together. We got to do it. It's a brilliant idea, isn't it?
What a fucking brilliant idea. It's so brilliant. We read your mind and we're doing it.
You already had stuff like a month and a half ago.
Again, in a nutshell, Corey, by the way, this is a riot. In a nutshell, we launched it a month ago. We're spending this entire campaign bopping around campuses, Two Dads Defending Democracy. The whole point is this: no matter who wins in November, and Fred and I both know who we want to win, but no matter who wins in November, this country is going to be 100 times more divided. And if we continue down this road where the person we disagree with is my mortal enemy, the democracy will not stand. So Fred and I are trying to model for people how you can do it.
Okay. So what are some of the ways that you're introducing the topic? I would imagine first you have to diagnose the problem properly. But then it's also about the remedies. So how do you diagnose the problem? How are you assessing the current state that we're in and the momentum where we're headed, regardless of who wins in November? And what do we do about it?
Do you want to go first?
You want to take that first, Fred? Huh?
Sure. Listen, go ahead, Joe. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, Corey, so Fred and I are like living examples. That's what got us on this tour. We are live breathing examples of the journey the American people have to go through. Most Americans are where the old Joe and the old Fred were. fighting and punching each other.
Right.
But wanting democracy to be okay and wanting to solve things.
Yeah. Fred and I have done the difficult, hard work of getting to know each other and understanding where each other comes from and trusting each other. And so now Fred and I can disagree respectfully. So when we talk, Corey, on campuses, we talk about our story.
Yeah.
We model how to do it. We help give students tools to learn how to do it. And we talk about why it's so important for our democracy.
Listen, I've raised my kids with this premise that it's easy to talk to people who you agree with. And of course, those probably the people will become your friends, but it's necessary and important to engage with those that you don't have common ground with.
Right.
That's how change happens. And we're seeing now in this election, aside, MAGA, okay, however many Americans it is, that has bought into autocracy. They're not, it's not like I'm saying something that they're not saying themselves.
No, Project 2025, there's a whole volumes written about
they
how
are not about democracy, they're about autocracy.
Right.
And so the problem is, and the guy running to represent them is only talking to them. He's not actually talking to the rest of America. He's only talking to them because he needs 100% of them to vote. And I think they will. What Joe and I are trying to model is to that rest of America, the part that still believes in democracy, the part that still believes change is possible, but the part that doesn't always believe they should get their ass off the couch and vote. And we're trying to show that, in fact, the fight is worth it, that change is possible, that you can talk to people who you don't necessarily agree with. It's okay. It's actually good. Okay. But at the end of the day, if you want the ability to keep fighting for change, if you want the ability to keep fighting for the things you believe in, if you want the ability to continue voting beyond this election, especially to the young kids who say, oh, I don't know if I'm going to come out. Well, guess what? You're now at that point in your life where you're going to be the future leaders. And you may not get the chance to do it if we get it wrong at 24. We are trying to show people that it's okay to have disagreements, but you got to talk. And most importantly, get out and vote for candidates who still support democracy.
But, Corey. On this tour, we're not telling people who to vote for. This is not Biden v. Trump. To Fred's point, we're telling people to get out there and vote.
Get out there and vote. Well,
for candidates who support democracy, there is one running for president that does, and there is one running for president that doesn't. But I'm not going to tell you who.
Yeah.
Well, but I'll agree with. And by the way, Corey, Fred and I disagree on this. And part of it is where I come from. I come from MAGA. I'm a reformed MAGA gangbanger. In my mind, nobody's unreachable. I talk to MAGA people every day. So I'm hoping that this tour can move anybody.
Right.
But to Fred's point, look, only one of these candidates embodies what Fred and I are talking about. Being respectful, being tolerant. Only one of these candidates embodies that. The other one doesn't.
So here's the thing. My contention, I have this conversation almost every day. My contention is that other than about 7 states, maybe as few as 4, the presidential election is already predetermined. However, there's state and local elections that really do matter. I happen to be supporting a local candidate for our state legislature, state Senate here in California, who's a Republican. What drew me to Suzette Valladares in the first place is that when she was in the assembly, she was one of the ones who was the founder of the state legislature's Problem Solvers Caucus. That's step one, is so she sees people with D before their name as her loyal opposition and her friends and her colleagues, not as the mortal enemy. So that's step one for me. Whoever I'm supporting, Democrat, Republican, Independent, or other parties. So that's one. She also said when she launched it, she might not like me saying this, but when with the first gathering, when she announced her campaign for state senate, she said, Trump is not the future of our party. And everybody around that table, other than me and maybe one other person, did not like hearing that. But the fact that as a Republican, she's willing to say it, and she took a couple other votes when she was still in the assembly that went against her party. Every once in a while, when democracy's on the line, for example, when Mike Garcia, our current House member, voted to overturn Pennsylvania, Arizona's election, that's a non-starter for me. But if you could join the Problem Solvers Caucus, if you could take an independent voice in favor of democracy, I'll vote for you regardless of what letters before your name. So those
and listen, look at what happened in Alabama. I think it was yesterday.
Tuesday.
A heavily Republican seat flipped Democrat by like 25 points because people voted. We have the power.
Yeah.
If we choose to use it.
Yeah. So, Joe, you mentioned something earlier, and I would imagine this is part of the first steps you got to take. You said 6 or 7 people that you reached out to didn't want to have anything to do with you. So how do you get more Freds to the table? How do you get more of those 6 or 7 that rejected you out of hand? How do you get them to the table in the first place, just to have a conversation, to humanize each other?
They need to see it. More and more people need to do what Fred and I are doing. And I think by the way, that's a big goal of this tour, is that Fred and I can set an example. More people need to do it. Corey and Fred, the media incentivizes us not to do this. Social media incentivizes us not to do this. I think after this election, the country's going to be looking for something. No matter who wins, we're going to be so exhausted.
Well, please count me as a recruit. If there's any way I can help you here locally or any other contacts, maybe we could talk about it offline. Any ways that I can, in a concrete way, help you.
Set up a tour stop out there.
Corey. Yeah, I don't think we have anything out that way.
You know something? So I bet Madrid or the guys Mike Murphy at USC. Madrid's down in Long Beach now, or Murphy and his guys at USC Dornsife. There's any number of people maybe we can initiate the conversation with.
That would be great.
Yeah. I'm going to put some thought to it, because that's my. So you have a whole professional life, Fred. You did all these things. I'm especially a fan of the Dunkin' Donuts thing, regardless of who you're rooting for in the playoffs. But the whole
Let's
Dunkin'
go Cats.
But no, in my professional life, my longest standing business is basically a headhunting, recruiting, M&A business. So I might have to put that cap back on and do some recruiting for you, and engage some folks I know. To get some of these tour stops going, man. It would be great to have you out here. So I want to start to land the plane. The question I ask everybody, we've already been talking about this, but let me just put it this way. It's the TP&R question. And that is, what can each of us do to be better able to have conversations with, share space with, and even nurture relationship with people across our differences? So people who have different backgrounds and beliefs than we do, who get their news from different sources than we do. How can we do better at talking politics and religion without killing each other, or is it even possible?
I'll just give one. If I could wave a magic wand and make everybody do one thing, it would once a day read from a news source or go somewhere, watch a network that is diametrically opposed to what you believe in. Read news, read an article, read an opinion piece that you disagree with. Do that on a daily basis. I think that's always a helpful tool.
Take time every day to talk to people who you don't know. Take the time. Learn how to do it. Just because you don't know someone, they're not necessarily your enemy, and you may learn new things that you didn't know before you had that conversation. Take the time.
That's a really good point. I was thinking about that yesterday. I was listening to a program called Fragile Neighborhoods with the Village Square that Liz Joyner runs, and it got me thinking, how can I do that in my neighborhood? And I thought of 3 ways so far. One is just on my walks. I go for walks a few times a week. And I could just talk to people, maybe set an extra 20 minutes aside if I can. and just stop and talk to Pierino, I call him, you know, talk to Pete, he's from Italy, and pet his dog and see how he's doing. Talk to Pat from Pittsburgh, who's working in his yard. Talk to Danielle and Jennifer, who are trying to figure out where to send their kids to school. You know, just talk to them. Another way is go to the same restaurant, a coffee shop, more than once. You know, 2-3 times a month if you can. Because people start to get to know you. You know, so there's a lot of different. You know, obviously you can go to the city council meetings, and you could go to the fundraisers, and you could go to the things to get involved locally, politically. But just like every day, man, like there's a sanctity in the mundane of just saying hey to somebody you're getting coffee with. You know.
Listen, my first book was called Find the Helpers, and it's based off of the Fred Rogers premise of as long as there is helpers, there is hope, and there's more to it. But Fred Rogers was all about neighborhood and community, right?
Yeah.
And I mean that's what Mr. Rogers was. Let's get back to that. The truth is, the MAGA side, they're not. They are about you either look like me and feel like me, or I have anger towards you, you know, and that's not America. So, you know, by talking to people, by getting to know people in whatever circumstance, you know, there's a community aspect to it. And let's just try to go back to that.
Yeah. Yeah. Second to last question. Do you have any questions for me?
I got one. This thing is an experiment. This thing we call America. I'm a dark Irishman. I'm generally bearish that this experiment will last. Corey, Nathan, are you bearish or bullish on the American experiment?
Well, you know, Joe, I'm a Jew from Eastern European stock, so I wouldn't be anything if I wasn't both at the same time, you know?
Bingo.
And now specifically what I mean by that is it's going to be ugly. There's no getting around it. I don't know exactly what kind of ugliness it is or how ugly it's going to get, but there's going to be some gnarliness up ahead. I am absolutely positive about that. But at the same time, what I grew up with my Baba and Zeta, and what Baba went through when she came from what's now Cherny Ostrov, Ukraine, what was Russia, part of the Russian Empire at the time, what they went through, some of the stories she shared, that was gnarliness. But she said, you know what? We're going to be okay. We'll be okay. You know? Yeah, there's going to be terrible things. The houses getting burned down. We're going to have to move where our families lived for 800 to 1,000 years. But we found Brooklyn. You know, we found the new world. You know,
she never lost hope.
Never lost hope.
What gives you hope?
The conversations like these, man. Conversations like these. Conversations and those conversations with Pierino and Daniel and Jennifer and Norman, who's working, you know, who's working in the field, helping with the horses not too far from my house, and Oscar, you know, who's coming with the hay and shoveling shit, and we have these great conversations. That gives me hope. Just every day, like, how you doing, man? You know, that gives me hope. One more thing I'll say about that. I have a very dear friend named Lisa Sharon Harper, and she and I are worlds apart in terms of how we feel about what's happened in Israel since October 7th. But, you know, one of the first people that called me after it happened, and we've been having long, in-depth conversations ever since, is Lisa. Lisa Sharon Harper called me, and she didn't say, well, what about the Palestinians? What about, you know, empire? And what about genocide? She said, how you doing, brother? You doing all right? And that's all it was. That's all our conversation was. We've had much more in-depth conversations about Netanyahu and all these different things, but her first and last thing is, how you doing, brother? That gives me hope. That gives me hope. So,
amen.
Yeah. So before we go, I want to know how we can follow each of you, get more information about where you're showing up with two dads talking democracy, as well as, of course, White Flag with Joe Walsh. These will all be in the show notes, but the links. But orange ribbons for Jaime, orange ribbons for gun safety. Fred, why don't you start? Tell us how we can find you and all the great work that you're doing.
So, as far as two dads, we're posting it regularly on both of our Twitter and Facebook. Orange Ribbons for Jaime, which is my foundation. We have a website, and it's OrangeForjaime.org. I also have my personal website, fredguttenberg.com. But the next 7.5 months is really focused on the Two Dads for Defending Democracy tour. And so the best place right now is going to be following both Joe and I on Twitter.
Okay. And Joe, how do we find you and White Flag?
I'll give you three things. The podcast is White Flag with Joe Walsh. Go anywhere where you listen to podcasts to listen to that. And I'm on all the social platforms, at Walsh Freedom on Twitter, at Walsh Freedom. The final thing I'll say, follow Fred and I if you want to know where the Two Dads events are. If you're interested in hosting a Two Dads event, reach out to us. Here's one easy email, joewalshwhiteflag@gmail.com. That's all one word. Joe Walsh White Flag, all one word, @gmail. If you're interested in hosting a Two Dads tour stop, reach out.
And it's okay to put that in the show notes, right?
Yeah.
Heck yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Well, we covered a lot. I think I'm getting you in right under the hour here, right under the buzzer. Is there anything important that we haven't discussed that you want to add before we close out?
Just end it with "Go Cats."
I'm going to cut that out, man. That's offensive to me.
Out,
Joe, Fred, this is so awesome. I am so glad that and thank you for listening to my brilliant idea about doing Two Dads.
Absolutely.
This was great. Thank you so much for coming in. It was great to get to know you, Fred. Good to see you again, Joe.
Thanks, Corey. Take care, guys.
Thanks, guys.
You bet. And as always, if you dig what we're doing here, remember to follow and write that review and tell a friend about talking politics and religion without killing each other. We are easier to recommend than ever. Just tell your friends to go to their favorite podcast app and type in "without killing each other," without the G in the killing. So "without killing each other," and you'll find our big purple logo there. Or you can find me online at Corey S. Nathan. That's Corey with an E, S as in Sam, at Corey S. Nathan. Now go talk some politics and religion with gentleness and respect and neighborliness, and have a great week.